So I finished my first book for the BookTube prize, fiction, my first round with fiction books this particular time, and that book was Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. I listened to this on audiobook. I was able to get it through my library, through my, my app, on my online app. We don't use the big one that everybody else use, Overdrive. We have a different technology that we use, but still same process. And it was excellent. I absolutely loved it. So I had read 2 Jacqueline Woodson books previous to reading Red at the Bone. I'd read Brown Girl Dreaming and also Harbor Me, which are both middle grade reads. And Brown Girl Dreaming is written in verse. So I loved those books. Both of those books I loved. And so I knew that Jacqueline Woodson is an author that I have truly enjoyed in the past. So I have really been looking forward to reading Red at the Bone. So I was pleased to actually be able to start this one. And it is a shorter audiobook. I think it's less than 4 hours long on audio. And I listened to it almost entirely within one day. Red at the Bone tells the story of a young girl. She's 16 years old. We start the story from her perspective. She is participating in like a coming out type ball. She's getting dressed, putting on a fancy ball gown that had belonged to her mother, had been her mother's dress. But her mother had never been able to wear it because her mother was pregnant with her when it was time for her coming out or debutante ball. And so the story progresses from there, and it's told from a variety of perspectives. We continue to hear from Melody, who's the 16-year-old who's in the present day experiencing this coming out ball, from her mother Iris, from Iris's mom and Melody's grandmother, Melody's grandfather, Iris's dad, and the father, Melody's dad. All those perspectives are telling the story of how Melody came to be, basically. What events led to this young girl getting pregnant and how that all unfolded once the baby, everybody knew the baby was coming and when the baby was born. I found it to be a very emotionally resonant read for me. I think listening to it on audiobook made it even more impactful. I thought it was really, really well done. Jacqueline Woodson can write. I mean, she is such a fabulous writer. And even though this book isn't told in verse, it's still very lyrical in its language. It's very beautiful. And yet it's so realistic. It's so you can totally understand the perspectives of each of the members of this family. And really nothing, I mean, it's just the history of this family being told, right? So it's not like this is a heavy plot novel or anything like that. It's a family story. It's a story of regular people dealing with the life that they're faced with, and how they do that, and how they love each other, and how they hurt each other, and how they come together as a family or don't. And it really just was so well done. And so what a wonderful start to round 2 of the BookTube Prize judging for me, with a very great book. So super excited about that. And now let's hope the next one is just as good.
The second book I finished for the BookTube Prize for this round is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I had previously read The Underground Railroad by Whitehead and really enjoyed it. So I was looking forward to this book. And I have to say that unfortunately I'm a little bit disappointed. I mean, I think it was a good read, but for me, it did not live up to my expectations of it. I think, well, let's just first, before I get into what I thought about it, let me just explain what it's about. And I have a little cheat sheet here. If I'm looking down, it's because I'm so bad at remembering names, so I had to write them down. So this is the story of Elwood Curtis. He's a young black boy in Florida in the Jim Crow time period. He is a very diligent student. He lives with his grandmother. And she's kept him on the straight and narrow. He really is interested in continuing his education. He's just been accepted at a black college, and he's very excited to go off and begin his academic career. He makes an innocent mistake and winds up getting sent to a juvenile reform school called the Nickel Academy, which is based on the true story of a horrific boys juvenile detention center that was in Florida and like was over 100 years of operation. So it's that part's based on a true story, but this is a fictionalized account. So anyway, Elwood gets sent off to this juvenile detention center where you can just imagine the kinds of horrors that await him there. It's a segregated school. There are white boys there as well, but they're held in a different part of the school, and while they're subject to some terrible things, they're not obviously treated as poorly as the black kids that are there. And Elwood is an adherent to Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings, and he very much lives by those tenets, and he wants to basically focus his life on making things better for members of his race through nonviolence. While at the Nickel Academy, he meets a friend called Turner, and Turner is his polar opposite. Right, Turner is cynical. He understands the ways of the world. He knows that if he's gonna, get out of this experience alive and intact, he has got to keep his head down and scheme and basically work the system to his own benefit. And so you're basically, it's a push-pull between these two boys who are friends, but also are seeing the world from two very different places. The problem that I had with the book is it's very short. It's only like 215 pages, so it reads really quickly. I mean, there's no doubt about that Colson Whitehead is an amazing author, right? Like, I cannot critique this book at all. On the writing itself, it is very, very good. And I like Colson Whitehead as an author, and I think this is an extremely important topic. But I just felt completely emotionally distant from the story. I felt very disconnected. I never felt emotionally invested in either of the characters. You would think a story about two boys in a reform school, which deals in torture and sexual abuse, would have you in tears through the whole thing. But it really didn't. And it just felt like a generic story. It didn't feel like anything special. It almost felt like a story that I'd read before. And that really kept it at the level of just an average read for me. It didn't feel like anything special. And it really seemed to lack emotion. And that was what I was looking for from the story. I mean, I expected to be wrecked by it. And it is a sad story. I don't want to downplay the horrible things that happen to these boys at places like the school. I mean, I think that's, a horrible thing. But I don't know. It just felt so distant for me. I just never felt connected to it. And so therefore, I just, it's just an average read for me. And I know that's probably a really not popular opinion, but that's where I'm at with it. I finished my third book for round 2 of the BookTube prize, and it is Queenie by Candace Carty-Williams. And right up front, I'm going to tell you I didn't like this book very much. If it had been up to me, I would have just been a DNF. So Queenie is a contemporary fiction set in England. Our main character, Queenie, is a 25-year-old Black woman who's working at a newspaper, and she cannot get her life together. She's on the verge. She's on a break with her boyfriend, quote unquote. Any of you remember the Friends reference? She's on a break with her boyfriend. She's messing up at work. She seems to be completely self-absorbed in how she deals and in her interactions with her friends. And she's just a very difficult person to like. Not that I need to like every character in every book, but Queenie is really difficult person to like. And so after about 100 pages of her just continually making the same mistakes over and over and over again without like seeming to come to any conclusions about why this might not be the best idea for her, she just kept doing the same things and like being a terrible friend and never listening to what problems her friends have, only ever wanting to talk about her own problems. And it was just awful. And I was really hating it.
And then the second half of the book redeems itself a little bit, but it still felt very shallow throughout. I think the book does address attitudes about mental health issues and therapy and all that sort of thing, specifically in the particular community in this book, which is people of Jamaican heritage that are currently living in England. But that was too little too late. And in fact, all of the interactions Queenie has feels super shallow. People don't seem to really learn from mistakes that they're making. There is it was just an irritating book. Just the whole thing was completely irritating. And the other thing that I didn't like about it was the author kept sort of throwing social justice issues into the book, like to make some point of, oh, this is a book about important topics, but they just felt tacked on. They didn't feel like they really provided any narrative drive to the story or really fit in with what the issues were that the characters were dealing with. Like there's some discussion of Black Lives Matters issues at the paper where Queenie works. There's some discussion of sexism and attitudes about the different attitudes about men and women when it comes to sexual exploits or freedom to be active in a sexual way in the way that you want. And all of that just felt tacked on. It never really felt like it was central to the story that was being told, or that it was central to the development of the characters. And honestly, it didn't feel like Queenie herself has a little bit of character development at the end, but overall, it was not anything that I wanted to read about. And I didn't feel like there was enough payout at the end to put up with the aggravation of reading the beginning. So yeah, that one is not going to be highly ranked for me. In this particular grouping right now, it's the worst book I've read so far. Out of the 3 that I've completed in April, it was definitely the worst one. So bummer. So the 4th book I read for the BookTube Prize was The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. And this is a novel which is basically a refugee story. We follow basically one couple from Aleppo, Syria, as they try to make their way to Great Britain. Nuri is the husband in the story. He is a beekeeper in Syria. He has a business with his cousin, and that business is destroyed in the civil war that's happening in Syria. And they lose everything. He and his wife, Afra, who is an artist, they lose everything, their business, their home, everything. And their whole community is destroyed. And as the violence comes closer and closer, Nuri is trying to convince Afra to leave Syria and to try to escape to Great Britain, where his business partner and cousin Mustafa has already gone. And she has been blinded by what she has seen and the trauma that she's experienced. And she really doesn't want to leave, or she's indifferent to their survival, basically. But he finally convinces her, and so they set off overland and they undertake this perilous journey from Syria overland and also by sea, trying to get to Great Britain. And it's just a wonderful story. It's so well written. It's very dreamlike in its narrative flow. And a lot of times it was not clear to me what a lot of it's narrated specifically from the point of view of Nuri. And a lot of it, I was unclear what was real and what he was imagining or dreaming. And I think that was part of the author's way of describing the grief and the fear and the terror that they were experiencing as they were trying to find sanctuary. And it was just so well done. I mean, both of these people are like totally experiencing PTSD, and they can't find safe haven, and everywhere they turn, they seem to be blocked from getting to safety. And there's lovely nature writing also within this book, where Nuri's flashing back to his younger days, and as he
first set up the beekeeping business with his cousin. And so there's wonderful descriptions of Syria and bees and fields and all of that kind of thing, and the bees that and the other animals that Nuri sees on the way between Syria and Great Britain, or as they try to get to Great Britain. Just a lovely, lovely book. So well done. I really enjoyed this story. Definitely a winner for me. And then the fifth book I've read for the BookTube Prize was A Woman Is No Man by Itaf Room. And this is a story, an immigrant story, a generational immigrant story of a Palestinian American family. And it's told through the eyes of the women in the family as they try to figure out how to navigate their own culture and also the culture in America as the family moves from Palestine to New York. And I just will say, trigger warning for domestic violence. The women in this family and in this culture are very held to a very specific standard of living, and definitely in a subservient way to the men in the family and in the culture. And so I'm going to put this book down. So it was difficult to read at times because of that and because of the violence that the women in the family experience. And so you're basically, you're being told the story in the present day of the granddaughter of, the woman that starts the story. And you're flashing back in time and learning the mother's story and the grandmother's story in turn in alternating chapters, not alternating, but in each chapter is told from one of the women's perspective, and you get mostly the granddaughter. First you get the daughter and then the granddaughter's perspective, and then you start to get the grandmother and the mother-in-law's perspective. It really gives you the full perspective of all of these women as they struggle to find their own identities, how much their identity, as a person is separate from the family when the whole culture is demanding that basically the woman has no place outside of the family and outside of the home. Really well done, I thought. This is a debut novel, and I am very interested to see where this author goes from here. I don't think it was perfect. I think there was some issues with how the story developed and the pacing, and also how different aspects of the timeline were laid out almost. And there was some sort of almost like there was this like little mystery plot that kind of got thrown in there in the middle that didn't really work for me as a mystery. It wasn't really very mysterious, so I wish that the author had sort of approached that maybe in a different way. But overall, I really did like it, and I thought it really gave me an insight into another culture and another way of life so different from my own. And I've read a lot of criticism of this book in that some folks felt it gives a negative picture of a Muslim Palestinian of the culture, that everybody's violent and that every man beats every woman. And I didn't feel that way at all. I felt like this was a particular story, and a lot of this story is based on what Itaf Ram experienced in her own family. So I didn't read it as sort of an indictment of an entire culture. I read it as a particular story of a particular family and how some people respond to certain cues in the overall culture. Certainly not, not everybody is going to respond in the same way. But I thought it was a very good read with interesting themes, and I really, really did like it. I read it all in one day, so that's very much a mark in its favor. So 5 down and 1 more to go. Yay! My last BookTube Prize book. Yay! Oh, upside down. Let's try that again. I finished All of Again last night by Elizabeth Stroh. I love this book so much. I know that this book is probably not for everyone, but for me, it just hits all the marks. It hits everything that I love about fiction. So All of Again is the follow-up book to Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Stroh. It's a sequel, but I don't think that you necessarily need to read Olive Kitteridge before you read All of Again. I do think that your reading of All of Again would be enhanced by having already met
Olive Kittredge in the first book. So the way that these books are structured is they're basically interconnected short stories. Each chapter is about a different character, a different theme, a different issue, and Olive Kittredge, an elderly lady in a small town in Maine, plays into that story in some way, whether she's a side character, whether she's the main character, whether she is just a passerby in a situation, somehow she plays into it. And so both books had the same narrative structure. And what I love about this so much, first of all, it takes place in Maine in a small town, so I love that. It's an elderly woman talking about dealing with issues that elderly people have to deal with in a very straightforward and non-romanticized way. We don't very often get fiction about elderly people, and I think Elizabeth Stroh does a masterful job of looking at these issues with just clear-eyed gaze and talking about them in a way that, you know, is so relatable and so everyday and so realistic. I just love that. Olive Kittredge is not like a warm, fuzzy character. She's not nice all the time, and neither is anybody else in the real world. That is the thing that I love about her. She's hard to like sometimes, but she's also can be hurt. She doesn't always understand why people take offense at the things that she says or does, but she's learning and growing as a character throughout. And in this book particularly, we really see her growth. We see her questioning herself in a way we didn't see very often in the first novel. We see her looking back over her life and thinking about things that she's done, different events in her life, and maybe looking at what they meant in a different light. So that's lovely. What this book says about human nature is amazing. I think Elizabeth Stroh just really is excellent at getting to the heart of the matter and really dealing with some tough issues in a very clear way, in a way that's written well. The writing is beautiful, but it's not lyrical, it's not poetical. It's just beautiful and realistic and just hits so close to home. I'm going to be thinking about this book for a long time. I will definitely be rereading this book in the future. I just love it, and I love Olive Kittredge and all, with warts and all. I just love her. And especially in this day and age where we don't very often get fiction about elderly people, I think this really says a lot about loss and grief and coming to a certain time in your life and what that means for you and your family. Well done. Just so well done. Really love this book. So that's it. That is all of the books for the BookTube prize in this round. And I will be back with, before I wrap this video up, I'm going to come back to you with my rankings. But first, I've got to figure that out. I just want to wrap up my BookTube prize video with my actual rankings. These are the rankings as I submitted them, and I'm going to go from the worst to the best, from my least favorite to my most favorite, and how I rank them. So 6 to 1. Numbers in 6th place, you'll not be surprised if you've watched the rest of this video, I put Queenie by Candace Carty Williams. In 5th place, I had The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. And then 3rd and 4th place were the most difficult 2 places for me in this round. And I will explain why. So in 4th place, I had Olive Again by Elizabeth Stroh. Now, I loved this book, but I think the reason why I didn't put it in 3rd place rather than 4th place is because it is, in my mind, a sequel to Olive Kittredge. And I feel like you need to read both of those books in order to gain the full impact of Olive's character development, because it really does continue throughout the course of both books. And if you haven't read Olive Kittredge, I think you might be a bit confused by some of Olive's behaviors in Olive Again. And I love that book, but because in my mind it is a sequel, I had to put it in number 4 versus number 3. So in 3rd place, I had Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. In 2nd place, I had A Woman is No Man by Etaf Rum. And then in 1st place, I had The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefteri. So
for me, this was a really good round. I mean, this was a bunch of good books. I didn't like Queenie very much for the reasons I've stated before. But other than that, the other 5 books were really good books. And I have heard now which books made it through. The 3 that I put in the top 3 slots made it through for my round, so that makes me very happy. Although I am sad that Olive Again has dropped out, even though I think my reasons are sound for not putting it in the 3rd spot. And I am looking forward to the next round, the semifinals, where I will be judging nonfiction Group B. So stay tuned for a video at the beginning of September. At the beginning of August. Yeah, June, July, we'll be reading for the semifinals, and then I'll have my video out at the beginning of August for the semifinal round. This was a really great time. I want to thank Robert over at Barter Hordes again for putting this all together, the BookTube prize. He does a tremendous amount of work for it every round, and puts up with a lot of stress from those of us who are judging. And he does a fantastic job, and it's super fun to be a part of the whole thing. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll talk to you later.